That's the thing that's really a lot of pages, right? Okay, Phil, so I've not in my meeting.
They were, did you see? They were really expensive.
Good evening. I'm going to open this meeting. It is November 10th, 2014. Welcome to the meeting of the Princeton Council. Madam Clerk, have we met all the noticing requirements for this meeting?
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you. And please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Here.
Ms. Cromiller? Here. Mr. Miller?
Here.
Mr. Liverman?
Here.
Ms. Butler?
Here.
Mr. Simon?
Here.
Mayor Lempert?
Here. And now please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome tonight. You'll notice as we go through tonight's meeting that there's going to be some firsts tonight and some new changes. One is I'd like to once again welcome our administrator, Mark DeShield, his first meeting was at our last meeting, but this feels like his official first meeting. So welcome. Yes. And then the other thing we're going to do differently tonight is because we've been going really late at a lot of our meetings, and it's just not sustainable, both for council and for the public who wants to be here, and we don't want to make people wait until 11 p.m. Until we get to their agenda items. So we do have a pretty significant closed session agenda after the meeting, so I'm going to try to do a hard stop at 10:15, and we'll try to get through as much as we can up until then. So I just wanted to let people know that up front. And the first item on the agenda this evening is approval of the minutes. And we have a corrected sheet here. Everybody should have a printout by their spot.
I'll move them. I also made a few spelling corrections, but minor.
Okay.
Second.
It's moved by Ms. Butler and seconded by Mr. Liverman. All in favor?
Actually, I'm
sorry, Mr. Simon.
I apologize for not sending the correction earlier, but
Can you speak into your microphone also?
we have a note that the two who are listed as absent here were actually present for the closed session by phone or Skype.
The minutes do say that, but I do want to accuse myself on the vote since I was not in physical presence at the meeting.
Sure. Okay. So that's noted. All right. Thank you.
Right, it's noted in the body, but not that they participated actually in the closed session. It's minor, but...
Are you sure?
On the back? On the back?
Yeah, no, it says you're absent, but in fact, remember you called in, and it's
That's
mentioned
right.
in the body of the
Right.
minutes that when Bernie said that you
Right.
had participated, but you're not listed as having called in.
Okay.
So with that correction, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So moved by Ms. Butler, seconded by Mr. Liverman. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And Ms. Howard, you're abstaining?
And I would like to abstain.
Okay. And the next item of business are comments from the public for items that are not already on the agenda. And I should say another change is that in order to do the hard stop at 10:15, we're going to be more strict about the 3-minute time limit, and Council President Miller has agreed to help me be a timekeeper, but I know you won't go over, Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie Chorney, 11 Reese Street. I just wanted to make it publicly known that while the bag referendum question didn't pass in Mercer County, it did carry in Princeton, 2-1. Yay. So we're hoping that we can keep the momentum going. And you'll probably be hearing more from some of us later of how we can do that, but hopefully looking forward to doing something in Princeton. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, please. My name is Abe Silverman. This is the first time I've actually ever been to one of these, so please tell me if this is not the right time. But I recently been living in Princeton for a while, recently bought a house. Yay, beautiful place, love it. And since then, I've had a couple of really sort of unsatisfactory touches with the property tax division. And actually, I am happy to pay my property taxes. I won't say they should go up, but I'm happy to support good schools and roads and all the other fabulous things Princeton does. But it's been kind of problematic. So when I moved in, there was a little glitch getting the tax paid on time. And instead of someone reaching out and telling me, hey, you need to pay your taxes, got really sort of an unsatisfactory touch with some of your staff, who are all very nice and very polite. But they seemed to imply they had no flexibility to address my issues or to fix this little issue. Again, it was not a big deal. I was more than happy to pay the money. And then the second touch, which actually really was what brings me here tonight, is I got this letter, and I brought a few copies if people want to take a look through it. And, so I got this letter, and the only thing I can say is it's not in English. I kind of defy anybody. I read statutes for a living. I'm used to reading incredibly abstruse, complicated things that make no sense. And I have to say this one completely baffled me. For those of you who can't see it, it's just a bunch of numbers with columns that have no headings. No kind of note, no cover letter, nothing telling me what to do. And so I would just suggest that in the future, maybe the council can sort of take two things to heart. One would be, talk to your frontline staff about flexibility and how to deal with minor disputes that come up. Just give them the kind of tools that they need to address these things without having to come to the council. And second, I'd sort of challenge you to look at all the documents that are going out in your name, particularly from the Tax Bureau, just to make sure that they actually do make sense. And I think that would be sort of a good governance kind of thing that y'all could do that would maybe avoid this kind of issue. And by the way, I have paid the $92 that it says I owe, though I'm still not quite sure why. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, Henry Singer from Laurel Circle. So I'd like to come back just very quickly to something I said about 2 years ago before we had consolidation. I had mentioned at that time that there was a lot of discussion about service and would service levels or service in general be affected by the consolidation. And, I had made a suggestion that we set a service baseline for the major areas of service that the municipality provides. And I recognized at the time it perhaps was asking too much, that the departments were undergoing a lot of change and the council was getting together, getting to know each other. So I really haven't returned to the issue in quite some time. But I think as we're getting ready for the next year, things are settled down. We have a new administrator. Perhaps there's an opportunity to, at least in key areas of service, start to understand what could we measure. And what I mean by that is what outcomes could we look for. If I use as an example roads, one measure might be what percentage of our roads are in excellent condition, whatever that excellent condition would mean. And if we have that as a baseline over time, we could see, is service increasing or decreasing? And I use that just as an example. Maybe that's not a good example. I really leave it up to the council and the administration to consider that. But I do think that enough time has passed that it is time to consider what measures, and I know we look very closely at financials, and I'm quite aware of that, but non-financial measures of performance, I think now's the time, and I encourage you, really request that you give that some hard thought, and look forward to hearing from you in months to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a great suggestion. We've started that. Actually, if you look on the webpage, there's a dashboard, a public dashboard with information, and we've started with a few departments, but you can see some of the information that we're tracking. So that's a start. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on an issue not on the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, I'll close public comment, and we'll start with our first presentation for the evening, Kristin Applegate from Princeton University.
Guess not. Now it is. So, as promised, as we have been over the past year and a half, I'm here before you tonight. I guess we have a connection problem, but maybe not. At times when the Arts and Transit Project is coming to a major milestone, and we are definitely coming to a major milestone. 1 week from today, the new permanent Princeton station will open. If you've been down in that area over the past few days, it is a beehive of activity. Just also wanted to note tonight with me in the audience, in case we have some additional questions that I can't answer, Ann St. Mauro, who is our Vice President for Design and Construction in the Department of Facilities, Kim Jackson, who you all know, Director of Transportation and Parking, and Kate Jones, who is a project manager working very closely on the Arts and Transit Project, who have all been part of our super team on campus. So I shared with you a whole host of slides that are in your packet. These are slides that are already available and have been available on the University Arts and Transit website. I know, just being mindful of what the mayor said at the beginning of the meeting, I don't know if it's necessary to go through all of the slides. Maybe, well, it's already going through them. So essentially what you have here in front of you is the sum of all of those slides. What will be happening next Monday is the train station will move to the permanent location with the first train at about 4:50-ish in the morning at the Princeton station. The waiting room will be open. The waiting room opens 30 minutes before and 30 minutes after the first and last train. The Wawa will open on Friday, November 21st in its new location. There will be short-term 15-minute parking in the lot next to the station. Maybe if I go to the next slide, you'll be able to see that. Let me go to a slide that's... So what you have in front of you now, you'll see where the short-term metered parking has been located with those blue bars. Of course, there's already parking in the commuter lot, both permit and daily meter. That will continue over the coming weeks, and I think Jack West and Mr. Kaiser can better give final dates, but additional muni meters will be installed along Alexander Street in the vicinity of the new station and Wawa. Just want to back up if I can. Vehicles can, as of Monday, November 17th, can access the Transit Plaza, South Station Drive, and of course the commuter parking lot. The new traffic light at North Station Drive and Alexander Street, I believe, started blinking this afternoon. We expect that will go live later this week. Let me check and turn around. Kate, is that Thursday? So you should see that traffic light operating on Thursday. Let me go back here. Pedestrians, because of course it is still an active construction site to the north of where the station and Wawa will be. Pedestrian routes will be marked very clearly. We ask that anyone walking through that area that you stay on the marked paths, don't walk on the shoulder of the road. We want everyone to be safe, cross at the new traffic light. Of course, the paths will open up as the project completes over the next 3 years, but we just ask that you walk where it's designated for pedestrian routes. Let me go through here just quickly, see if there's anything else I'm forgetting. There'll be, where that pink bar is located, that is where Tiger Transit, the Freebie, and New Jersey Transit will be stopping, which is right in front of the new station and Wawa, and that's starting next week. The bus stops that are on Alexander Street right now, near where the temporary station was located, those will be removed, and actual more of your muni meter parking will go in there. So just note that if you're looking for a New Jersey Transit shuttle, the Freebie, or Tiger Transit, that will now be stopping co-located at the train station to make it easy for people to switch from one mode to the other. I also didn't mention yet, but bike racks, close to 100 bike racks will be available. Many of them are covered, some are not covered. We'll have the 10 bikes that are part of the pilot bike rental program. They will be starting next week as well. And then also within the garage, there will be 20 spaces for what are called bike lockers. So some people who ride bikes like to really put their bike in a safe and secure location. Information about using those bike lockers will be available from our Transportation and Parking Services office, and they will be available for rental by the general public, as will the bike share program, bike rental program. I'm not sure if there's any other high-level sort of updates. I'm happy to answer questions. I see Councilor.
Ms. Butler?
A quick question. The light at North Station Drive and Alexander, people enter and exit the garage mostly at certain hours, you know, when coming to work, and then everybody's let off. How will that light work? Will it be green most of the time on Alexander, or is it going to change regardless of whether anybody's entering and exiting the lot?
It'll be primarily green on Alexander, and what we've done is, due to input from the engineering staff, there's the ability to actually link this traffic light with the light on Faculty Road. So they can be part of a light, and at Lawrence Drive, so they can be part of a light system, and we'll be looking to optimize that in the coming weeks and months.
Ms. Krummeller?
Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask if the car share program will be active at the time that the station's open and where the cars will be.
I'm going to let Kim Jackson respond to that question. The We Car? Will there be a We?
The car share?
Car share. I have to get, Kim's a superstar, I have to let her come to the mic.
Sorry. The car will be there on Tuesday for the car share program. And it'll be located just south of that blue bar where it says South Station Drive with the circle on it right now, the highlighted light blue. It'll be parked right over in that area, and there'll be signage up there.
Ms. Krummeller?
Yes. So I see it says station drop-off only, no standing. Does that mean that you didn't keep the dedicated drop-off and pickup spaces where you could come and park for free and wait for your person that we used to have?
The Kiss and Ride is located, if I go back, see where it says short-term metered parking?
So, but it's metered, it's not free.
Right, so if you're sitting in your car, sit there.
And it's not...
It's 15 minutes.
It's not...
It's not free, Jenny, no.
Okay, and it's not dedicated. In other words, the Wawa parkers are going to use it.
Right, it's a shared short-term meter spaces.
So just pointing out that we lost that.
No, you didn't, because there's more spaces there that were in front of the Wawa and in front of the station before, so there's actually more spaces.
Ms. Howard?
Kristin, there are also some changes being made to the west parking lot, right? And is that related to this work?
Thank you for pointing that out.
Well, I just noticed because we went to a women's hockey game, and
thank you for
looked
pointing
like
that
things
out.
are changing there, and people need to know what's happening there.
Sure. So actually, we are putting gates on the west parking garage, so the gates will be down from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m., and you'll need what's called a transponder, like Easy Pass, to get in and out of the garage, which employees who are assigned to that parking lot will have those transponders. Others who need to go there on a short-term basis will get permission from Transportation and Parking Services. The gates will go up at 5 p.m. You can park there at night now, and you'll be able to park at night there in the future, and the gates will be up on the weekends. It's just from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. One other note that I didn't mention, so I think a number of people, maybe some of you sitting in front of us, have taken advantage of the McCarter shuttle that's been operating from the commuter lot up to McCarter on performance nights. The McCarter shuttle will stop at the same location next to the Wawa where the other buses are going to be stopping. So I just wanted to mention that because I know it's been of use to McCarter patrons. And did want to note that as of noon on Monday, November 17th, the Tiger Paw will no longer operate. We committed to operating that for the time when the station was moved to the temporary location, and since we're moving back to the permanent location, the Tiger Paw is going to stop operating.
And are there other major changes that you're expecting between when the station opens and then the summer of 2015?
No. We're going to keep building. You'll start to see the new Lewis Center for the Arts actually coming out of the ground. You'll see the Wawa the old Wawa building coming down sometime over the winter. As I said, they moved to their new location, and I'm sure many of you will be getting an invitation from them to come to their festivities. They'll be moving in the 20th and 21st, opening to the public on Friday the 21st. And then the cafe and rest, the first of the next milestone will be when the cafe opens sometime summer, fall next year.
Ms. Crummer?
Just a technical question. This slide seems to be different from the one in our packet, and I just wondered, is this the one, which one's on the public website?
I don't see what's in the packet, so they should be the same.
What's difference is that it says no standing. In one of the slides it said no standing, and it doesn't say that anywhere on this one, which is one of my little issues, as you know.
Yeah, you shouldn't stand there.
I want to.
I know.
Are there any other questions from council?
And could you again repeat the hours of operation for the Wawa?
The Wawa is open 24 hours a day. And it's important that it be open, especially when the station is operating, because the restrooms, we will now have a train station with air conditioning, with heat, and with restrooms. So we need those restrooms open so people that need them can use them.
Great. All right, well, thank you very much. These reports are really helpful.
Thank you.
To keep us
so
up to date.
To the extent that you need me to come back after we start to operate there, happy to do so, but we're looking forward to getting started next Monday. I know Kim Jackson and I will be out there for the first train. So if anyone comes, we'll have some coffee starting at 6 o'clock, so come out and check it out. And thank you. These have been very helpful to us in coming to speak with you. So, and also just wanted to thank your staff, who have been absolutely fantastic in working with us to stay on track to get the project open, a project of this scale, and we're staying on track and opening when expected. So it's been really a great working relationship, and we thank the engineering staff and everyone in the construction office.
Great, thank you. All right, as you're breaking down, I want to introduce our first report for tonight, which is going to be Barry Royce, who's chair of the zoning board. And this is, I believe, one of the first for councils to actually have the chair of the zoning board come and talk to us. And I think it's a useful conversation to have. The zoning board is one of the very few boards, committees, commissions we have where there's not a member of council who is a liaison and who goes to the meetings, and that's by state statute. But as a result, sometimes we don't always get to have the conversation that we should be having about what issues the zoning board is facing, what variances they're tending to give over and over again, which indicate that there might be something we need to look at in our zoning ordinances. So as we're about to embark on a big ordinance harmonization with our land use code, it seemed appropriate to have Barry here and tell us what he's seeing and what the zoning board is seeing on the ground. That, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I believe it's the first time ever I've been on the zoning board for some vast period of time. This is the first formal presentation that anyone from the board has made. We always pass a document over the fence at the end of the year, but there's a certain suspicion that it falls into a bucket and is never really looked at. So what I thought I would do this evening is just to pick a few of the headlines on the piece of paper that I believe has been made available to the council and to the public, and try and give the reason that we feel these are valuable things to worry about. It's particularly appropriate because next year we will begin the consolidation of two books of rules, one from the borough, one from the township. And there are certainly things in them that will take a little bit of reconciliation, let's put it that way. The first reason that I thought that this would be useful is because we have a lot of cases, and I think we've enumerated them 6 last year, 7 this, where the board really can do nothing except be obnoxious and say no, because essentially, as of right, somebody who has got a piece of property should be able to keep on using it, and it is a consequence of a zoning plan having been popped on top of pre-established lots. And if I remember correctly, something like 60% of the lots in the combined Princeton really don't meet the constraints that the zone they're in implies. And so the first thing we felt that would be useful, in a sense, to preserve the quality of the neighborhoods, was to recognize that there are clumps of properties very frequently in zones that, as a group, do not meet the appropriate ordinance requirements, and to recognize those and set them as a sub-zone, if you like, and so that people who wished to develop those properties would not need to come before the board, say they couldn't buy neighboring property, and all of the things that they have to say. This is a very expensive process in general if you employ an attorney, and it puts the prices of housing up. And so we felt that it would be very desirable to recognize some units of that sort. They're not just tiny ones. Some of them are in the Edgestone area. Some of them are just across the road by the park. Clumps of places like that. And just say, as of right, people can develop those. They have to do the development in such a way that all of the appropriate setbacks are obeyed. And there's a question, which is sort of my next little note, about the floor area ratio that might be permitted. But we are suggesting for that type of lot, the floor area ratio should not get a bonus because of the smaller lot size. The issue of floor area ratio is always cropping up. Many of these things may just be administrative and not really require more than a change in the wording somewhere. But when we have isolated lots in a series of lots that are of correct size, it has been normal to permit the smaller lot to have an overage of floor area ratio to compensate for that. And it would seem appropriate that that habit should continue into the future, in contradistinction to the situation I've just said for the clumps of similar small lots, where you would like to keep the character of the neighborhood, not having a humongous house among a group of already developed smaller houses. So by restricting it to just the floor area ratio allowed by the lot site rather than a bonus, we think that that might be taken care of properly. The height to setback ratios, again, between the two former municipalities are somewhat in conflict, and it seems that at the time we consolidate the ordinances, that issue should be addressed. And I think if we do talk about sustainability in our future, we should take particular care with issues that might affect, for instance, solar panels on a roof. You don't want the sort of height to setback ratios of one building to shade another one, and so on. So I think there are some worthwhile thoughts that could go in that respect. Front yard setbacks is another issue, particularly from the viewpoint of parking in the front yard. Formerly, in both the former entities, parking in the front yard is forbidden, and any desire to have a parking place in the front yard is reviewed by the zoning board or by the planning board if it goes there. And it just seems that actually this morning, the Master Plan Subcommittee started thinking about the front yard parking concept, and I think that one really is going to wend its way through the process already. But again, if we're talking of a front yard setback, there are rules in the borough that seem to make good sense. Occasionally you have an outlier building that may be a long way back, and if you do what we have normally done and compute an average front yard setback, if you include that building, it pushes the building capability too far backwards. And so in principle, what has happened in the borough in the past is we have excluded buildings of that sort and looked at, say, 3 or 4 buildings on either side or in a short part of a block, and use them to define the mean sort of front yard setback, which may not actually agree with what is allowed in the zoning, but under those circumstances, you don't suddenly have a house right up on the sidewalk on Library Place, because that's where it could be, but everyone else is a long way back. So it's an attempt to maintain a unified streetscape. On-street parking, again, it's not really a zoning issue. It influences, perhaps, front yard parking, because certainly in the borough previously, people who could not park on their property could get overnight parking permits for the street, or purchase an overnight parking permit for a municipal parking lot within some reasonable distance of the property. Something that I have noticed recently is that because Princeton has become a tourist attraction, a large number of buses are being driven away from Nassau Street, and they end up on Prospect Avenue, they end up on Princeton Avenue, and so on. And it seems to me that when you're thinking about this non-zoning issue of on-street parking, some particular attention should be paid to that type of thing, because it seems likely to increase in quantity rather than diminish as time goes on. The site triangle issue is one that comes up frequently when people are asking for a driveway coming out of their property, and others will say, well, we don't want a driveway there because it's used by school children going along the street. The vision as you're pulling out into that area is not good. And so it seemed a logical attempt to take care of that issue, to say that any driveway coming out onto a road should have a sort of a site triangle associated with it, so that the view of the sidewalk that is immediate there should be taken care of. We have site triangles where not major ways, where town roads intersect, and again, they need to be maintained. There's a beautification habit which is becoming annoying. People sometimes like to plant nice things like sunflowers and so on in what might be a site triangle area, and they are, from the viewpoint of somebody sitting in an automobile and trying to look at traffic or pedestrians, they are too high and you can't see over them. And so I suggest that if one is talking about site triangles, some issue should be made about neighboring planting, and it should be kept low enough that you can see over the top. This actually, in some of the private property, like the university's traffic circles, they tend to plant things on top, and again, you can't see the traffic on the traffic circle, and that, again, I believe, is a dangerous, if not zoning issue, but it's something that one might want to take care of. There are still some remaining biggish lots in the borough, former borough, that could be turned into 2 lots, so one would have a flagged lot with one behind and one in front, and a driveway leading to the flag lot. Where it's happened sometimes, this has caused sort of looming structures that overlook the backyards of a number of people, which wouldn't happen if the house were built where it should normally be on that road. And I believe in the township this has been taken care of by requiring that the rear lot in the flag lot there be 50% larger than the lot size required for that area. That then provides sort of a front yard setback, if you like to think of it that way, on all sides of that flag lot, and reduces the impact on the neighbors. And I guess the last bête noire, the thing that started my life in zoning, is the issue of signage. The number of types of sign in the former township must border on 100, and I think those in the former borough border on about 5 or 6. Now, I agree the geography and the road types are different, but it would seem that some rationalization of the two sets of rules to minimize the number of options needed would be a sensible thing to institute at the time that we're trying to consolidate things. Now, there's another, again, personal observation rather than something that's been approved by the zoning board, as this document was at its last meeting. They wanted what we've said here to be faithfully presented to you. And that is, there are lots of temporary signs that appear and litter our streets. Some of them have commercial interests, and they just crop up. And in fact, as always, the township itself or the municipality itself is not averse to doing this, and a big truck with a large lighted sign appears on Harrison Street as it heads past the shopping center, advertising some event that's going to occur in the town. I personally don't think it's beautiful. I think it represents a traffic hazard because it does block vision and distract people in a location where that shouldn't occur. So with those few comments, I forward this document that comes with the approval of the zoning board to you, and hope that we can continue conversations of this sort. I feel it a privilege to have been invited to come and present this material to you.
Thank you very much, and it was very helpful to get the report in person, and I want to thank you. A lot of the things are minutia, but it's, when you think about it, it's what keeps our neighborhoods nice and Princeton a lovely place to live, so thank you for your work.
One way to preserve the town.
Yeah, but can you just stay for a minute, because there might be questions. Okay, I had one question about the list. Are those in order of importance, or was there?
Yes.
Okay.
To zeroth order. We discussed that in the board, and they felt that ordering was appropriate.
Okay.
Some of them, I think, can be almost automatic because they're trivial, but others may require zoning changes. The front yard parking may require significantly more discussion than, in a sense, anticipated.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Ms. Butler.
The signage, number 9, what signage are you?
Well, the buildings have notifications on them saying what they're occupying, what they're selling, and everyone wants a bigger sign. Subway Sandwiches comes in next to Hoagie Haven and knows, unless it's got a massive sign, nobody will go there or something like that. But the signage rules are such that it can be made more modest. It still clearly identifies the store, but it's not an eyesore.
Right. I didn't know whether you meant street signs. Just as a point of interest, we have met and discussed this. We've had a preliminary discussion about the sign ordinance. That's
good.
So we should be bringing it sometime soon, next several months.
Okay.
Ms. Howard?
So thank you for bringing light to something that has been probably not so transparent to a lot of people, so this was really helpful. And you raised an issue that I know it's important to a lot of people, in fact, a lot of people, I think, in the audience who are here for other matters, but parking. And so maybe bring it back. I'd be interested, I think people would be interested in knowing, if I could ask my colleagues who are working so hard on the ordinance, can you give us a sense of where we are on the parking and when we can expect to, where is that in the queue, some of the parking stuff?
We've met once or twice, and we have another meeting coming up.
Right, the parking committee has only met once.
Okay.
But we and we're meeting, I don't know how many meetings we'll need, probably not many, 1 or 2 more meetings, and then we'll bring a proposal to the council.
So it's very much a live issue that we're going to get to address next year, and folks can weigh in. Great.
Okay. Ms. Simon?
Yes, I guess Mr. Royce or possibly Mr. Sell, this question would be directed to one of you. Do any of these recommendations specifically address some of the concerns that we hear from residents about the ability of developers to build McMansions on relatively small, where there's currently relatively small homes? It looks like number one might, but it's not clear to me whether technically that's correct or not, a correct interpretation. Is anything here trying to address that issue of sort of preventing McMansions where they don't really fit?
Well, in the sense that the floor area ratio is an attempt to deal with that, one doesn't want to constrain people from building what is legally permitted, of course, but by saying, well, for those lots that are in a group of lots, they may not be all that small. They may be 1 acre lots in a region where you need to have 1.5 acres or something. So that it's not that they're minute lots in town. That's a more difficult issue in some ways. But just not to allow a bonus for that group of buildings so that what is developed on those sites are not terribly out of scale. They may be bigger, but they won't be terribly bigger than the buildings that already exist. It's mainly that, these buildings have been around for 40 or 50 years, and people look at them and say, well, it's easier to knock down and rebuild than it is to modify this to give me what I want. And so the attempt is to keep some unity in the neighborhood. And that's certainly what the neighbors come in and tell the board.
Okay, so that's really the floor area ratio point here?
Yes, I think that would take care of it. That's our zeroth order attempt, if you guys have got better ideas.
And then the front yard parking, does that include what driveways as well as yards, or is that when you describe not parking in the setback?
Well, there's a front yard setback, and in both the former township and the borough, you're not allowed to park in that region. Your neighbors, for instance, on Harriet Drive, have got a driveway leading to their garage, and they have 2 cars frequently parked outside the garage, or the garages, as there are 2 of them, and those are formally illegal parking habit.
Okay, so that is actually my question, because that seems to be actually a fairly common practice in the neighborhoods that I walk
and
around.
it's sort of universal.
Yes.
But the thing that was thought of more here is a vehicle right in the middle of the front yard in front of the house.
Okay, so you are trying to make a distinction between what would traditionally be considered a yard versus the driveway.
Not in what I've said here. The zoning as it stands at the moment, I don't think makes that distinction. Mr. Bridger can perhaps clarify that for me.
I think most of the ordinance
I think the ordinance deals with the creation of new parking spaces on sites. Everyone parks in front of their driveway. You'd have to hire several deputies if you wanted to enforce that realistically, but I think the zoning board is more concerned with, there's an ordinance already on the books that prohibits parking in their front yard, and that's their guide, and they try to make the best decisions they can with that, so.
Okay, and for most homes, that is actually the front of the home, is that right? That setback is...
Well, that's a little It's gotten trickier when you speak about FAR. The FAR was introduced in the borough in 2006, which was the first attempt to control large houses relative to lot size. Also, at the same time, they introduced the prevailing front yard setback. So prior to that, there was pretty much a standard setback in the borough of 35 feet, where you could park behind the 35 feet. You would still be in what would look like a front yard, but you would be complying. Now it's prevailing. Like Barry said on Library Place, the prevailing front yard setback is like 80 feet. So you can't park in that 80-foot, and it goes right to usually goes right to the front of the house. So it's something we'll have to look at when we look at the ordinance. The township's a little bit different. They have parking setbacks in the front and side and rear yards, but they have larger lots on the whole. So I think both work for the community. It's just when we go forward, we'll have to figure out if there are any tweaks that can be, done to each of them.
Mr. Miller?
Well, thank you for kind of stoking the embers a bit on the tour bus issue. It seems to be both a seasonal issue and an issue of tourists being sold on a tour of Princeton as a destination. And we've had several meetings, we being the municipality, the university, and the business community, to discuss what might be done to kind of manage this for the betterment of the town. Because in some instances, the tourists actually do spend money in the town and help the businesses in the town. I'll add another parking location for the buses. Occasionally we find them parked in our municipal parking lot, particularly at Monument Hall, occupying 4 or 5 parking spaces, and we have to kind of politely ask them to move and suggest someplace that they might move to and cause less of a problem. Most of them will move and go someplace else when asked to do so, particularly if we can give them some help in directions to get there. But I think it is a problem that must be addressed, must be managed. Otherwise, it's going to be disruptive primarily during the months of warmer weather when there are many tour buses that show up on Nassau Street.
No, Nassau Street is clearly an inappropriate location for this. But as we've cleared the borough space, or the township space just across the road, you could have a 10-bus parking place there and charge them.
At least temporarily. All right, well, thank you very much. I think you've given us some really great ideas.
Thank you.
The subzones and a lot of things on your list, so we'll be taking a look at those for sure and working them. Are there any staff reports? Mr. Kaiser?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to mention that the hospital demolition is moving along. Mark DeShields attended the regular morning meeting this morning, and the demolition contractors made good progress. All the buildings are now down except for the 6-story building, the 7-story building, and they're waiting for a long-reach specialized piece of equipment to come in before they can get started on those 2 buildings. They've started to take the skin off of the 7-story building adjacent to Witherspoon Street, and there's a styrofoam-type material that's behind that skin. So you may see some styrofoam falling down, but they have an individual who's picking it up if it happens to fall in the sidewalk area or in the street area. But the project is moving along well, and will continue on schedule, weather permitting. If it gets very cold, they would have to slow down or be curtailed because the misting operation would freeze as opposed to cause the dust to settle to the ground.
Thank you.
Liz,
can I spell it?
Yes, I have a question about that. Thank you so much for the updates, and thank you for the pictures. They're really helpful, I think, when we get them and about what's going on. As you know, we've gotten a number of complaints from residents about the dust that has been created. I haven't heard so much in the last week or 10 days, but can you comment? I really do appreciate how cooperative you've been and responsive, but can you talk about the results of the dust monitors?
Yes, with the dust monitors, there are 4 dust monitors located on the site, and so far, none of the dust monitors' readings have exceeded 50% of the allowable regulated readings for dust. So the dust has been fully in compliance on the site.
Thank you. Are there any other staff reports? No. Ms. Howard, do you have reports?
Nothing pressing.
Ms. Krummeller?
Well, I just wanted to report from the Master Plan Subcommittee. The council had asked the Master Plan Committee to look at changing the master plan or putting some language in about the front yard parking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bernie, or anyone else here, but the committee pretty much said, we don't want to look at that. Front yard parking is prohibited, so they didn't want to add any language to the master plan. So I just thought I would let you know that. So we can address it in other ways through the land use code and the ordinance review.
Mr. Miller?
No reports.
Mr. Liebman?
No, just briefly, I know we mentioned before in regard to the affordable housing qualification from so many applicants in Princeton, and some of the problems that we've had were things such as credit, bad credit, or poor performing and past rental payments and so forth. So the affordable housing, along with a few other agencies, are going to be offering in January a workshop to try to correct and help people with credit problems. So when it comes time to applying for affordable housing within Princeton, your credit and your application can be 100% on board. So this will be happening in January. We're looking at January 17th, and we'll advertise it, and hopefully that'll be a start to trying to get a lot of people in a good position so they can afford affordable housing.
Ms. Butler?
No, I just want to say that's excellent news. Thank you very much, and I don't have any reports.
No report.
Okay. Unfortunately, I have many reports. I wanted to start by congratulating Council President Miller and Councilwoman Butler. It wasn't necessarily a real nail biter this time, but congratulations on your election victories the other day. We're glad to have you back. And I also want to congratulate Bob Kaiser, who was awarded Government Engineer of the Year by the American Society of Civil Engineers, Central Jersey Branch. And Council President Miller and I went to the celebration. It was a really great event, so congratulations on that. All right, one more clapping item. Princeton was awarded a gold award from the Greater Mercer TMA for being a smart workplace for the flex time work schedules that were put in place. So it's another great recognition. I have to say, Princeton has been receiving a lot of recognition for the leadership we've shown and some of the innovative programs we've had in the past couple weeks, so that's been a great thing to see. The New Jersey League of Municipalities is going to be holding its annual conference next week, and they come out with, this is a professional organization for all towns in New Jersey, they come out with a monthly magazine, and this month's magazine on the cover features the immigration work that's going on here in Princeton. Councilwoman Howard's, especially I want to thank her for her leadership on this, and we're going to be part of a panel down at the conference along with Chief Sutter and Lisa Niera from the Human Services Department. And the League is really excited about the wage theft provision in the landscaper ordinance, the police directive that Chief Sutter put out on immigration, and some of the other outreach that's been going on. So it's great to see our efforts being recognized by the organization and hopefully adopted by other communities in the state. A few weeks ago, I was asked to participate in an affordable housing panel put on by Plan Smart New Jersey, and again, wanted to give Princeton credit for the work that has been done here for affordable housing. I see former Mayor Jim Floyd in the back, and it was through his leadership and a lot of the leadership of past councils dating back all the way to the 1930s, 1920s that Princeton has become a leader. Unfortunately, right after that conference, there was deadlock with the new COA rules, and so we are somewhat in limbo on that. The court ordered COA to come up with new rules by November 17th, which is probably not going to happen, and we're just waiting, like everybody else, in terms of what direction we're going to have. Let's see, really quickly, I had a meeting the other day with Bob McQueen from representatives of the library and some Princeton University students who organized the Hack Princeton event on campus, and they're really excited to help us put on a hackathon for the town. And this is it'll be, ours would be multi-generational, but it'd be people coming, the library is willing to host it, and working on apps that will improve citizen engagement, maybe help some of the students who are really excited about engaging in the town. And so if you have ideas for that, let me know. We've already come up with a couple ideas, for example, having some sort of crowdsourcing for our tree inventory so people can look at the trees on their own street and make sure that the information is correct. Jenny had the idea of a pet finding, if you lost and found for pets, that we could work on Save With. So it would be a fun way to get all the great minds across the street and in town to think about how to make our government work better. And a couple more announcements. There's going to be a summit here on Monday, November 17th, for a White House initiative called My Brother's Keeper. And this is to encourage communities to implement a coherent cradle-to-college and career strategy for improving the life outcomes of all young people in the community to ensure that they can reach their full potential. And among the goals of the challenge are ensuring all children enter school cognitively, physically, socially, and emotionally ready, ensuring all children read at grade level by third grade, ensuring all youth out of school are employed. The school district is excited to be partnering with us on this, and I've also reached out to a lot of the nonprofits in the community too. So that will be on Monday afternoon. And finally, just a couple of things coming up. Veterans Day is tomorrow. There's events at 11. And I see Kip Cherry, I think she's still here, but there's the Civil War Trust is having an event at noon in front of the former Borough Hall. And and 8:30 a.m. there's a service at the chapel at the university. November 13th, this Thursday, the Mercer County Freeholders are going to be holding their meeting here. So if you've ever wanted to find out about county government, this could be your week of meetings. I encourage you to come here. It starts at 6 p.m. But we are really hoping to have a strong Princeton turnout, in part because of consolidation and other belt tightening. We actually pay more of our taxes to the county than we collect here for the municipality. So this is a big chunk of your tax bill, and I encourage you to come out and make your voice heard on issues that you care about at the county level. And finally, December 1st, there's going to be a special meeting for board and commission chairs. I know it was really interesting to hear Mr. Royce here tonight, and there'll be more of that from all the other boards and commissions and committees on December 1st. So with that, I'm done with all my reports. I think that's it. So now we'll turn to our work session for this evening, and we have two work session items related to the budget. Once again, this is a little bit of another first in that we're trying to get ahead of the budget process earlier in the year. I'm going to turn things over to our administrator, Mark DeShield, in a second, but really the point of tonight is to set down our priorities and goals before the budget is put together. And this is a bit of a chicken and egg problem because we're being asked to give guidance when we don't have all the numbers in front of us, but once we have all the numbers in front of us, certain decisions have been made. So the idea is we understand that it's not a perfect system either way, but it's good to start the conversation now. So with that, I'll turn things over to Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to begin, Council. What we're looking for to do this evening is to establish a framework for the 2015 budget. In doing that, I'm going to run through a couple of items where I'm going to need some guidance from the Council. Just going to talk about a couple of things that we're going to do. One you have on your agenda this evening is establishment of a budget calendar. That later on in the agenda, you'll see a resolution that will establish that. And then I'm going to walk through, one thing I think is important, the mayor talked about it a little bit, is we are early on in the process, and we're looking for guidance. We're going to give you some information to kind of give you a framework, an idea of what we see happening in 2015, and just to get some feedback so that we can develop a budget that we can give to you guys that will fulfill your goals for 2015. So we wanted to go through a couple of kind of key items. First being our surplus policy, and we wanted to evaluate that. We looked at the 2015 budget surplus projections to just get an idea of what we believe surplus will look like next year. That will have an impact on how we will look at surplus in terms of adding it into the budget. So if you look at the end of the year surplus in 2015, what our projections, end of year 14, what our projections look like, we're seeing the surplus will be below our initial projections by about $745,000. That's due to a couple of issues, one being lower appropriation reserves that will be lapsed, and also some reductions in our revenues. That still keeps us within the 15 to 20% target that was established by the Citizens Finance Committee. So we're still in good shape, but what that does tell us, we need to be conservative moving into 2015 when we look at the surplus issue. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, and I'm going to jump around just a little bit from my memo, in terms of the operational budget moving into 2015, we did a projection for the council, basically looking at what information we have now. We've just gathered the information. If we look at a status quo, and that's just our baseline budget moving into 2015, and only accounting for those things like increased salaries based on contracts, and then other required expenditures for the year, and salary wages is looking like we will be up 2.5%, or about $433,000. And then in other expenses, up about $500,000 and about 1.4%. In total, the total budget we're anticipating at a status quo will be up about $1 million. And that's based on a number of pressures within the budget that we see going up, one being garbage and trash removal going up about $190,000. Insurance going up $290,000. That's based on the state health benefits plan, a 7.4% increase. We see a reduction in deferred charges. That's based on some capital you did last year that's going out of the budget. And then other departmental increases in IT, infrastructure, library, and utilities of about $380,000. And these are just in the baseline budget. In addition to this just gives you the impact of our baseline budget moving forward into 2015. What we need from the council is some guidance on how you want us to present the budget. We know of at least 2 areas where there's additional personnel requests from departments. They are at stage now where they're not ready to be presented to you. They need to be further vetted. But we want to know whether you would like us, one, we can present you kind of a baseline budget with alternatives, showing each one of those alternatives and how they'll impact the budget. We can include the proposals, and I'll give you the areas that have made those requests, are maintenance in the recreation department for additional staffing, and DPW, some additional staffing also in that area. So one of the questions I have for the council is how you want us to present that budget to you, either as a all-in, what we believe, or do you want to see them as alternatives? So I'm going to stop, and then we'll talk about capital in a little bit.
Ms. Kramer? Well, I'd like to hear from department heads. I say this every year because in fact, I remember Kristin Applegate is the one who, when I first got on council, told me they did this in West Windsor, and it always sounded like a good idea that the department heads came to the council and talked about their budgets and told us what they were asking for and why, and we could kind of have a back and forth. And I wondered if you think that's a good idea, and if we could, I know we don't have very many meetings. I mean, we have too many meetings, and so this is probably adding, maybe 4 or 5 meetings. I just wanted to know if the other council members would be interested in doing that.
If I may, Mayor, One thing I may suggest, one way you can do this, as I talked about, there are some areas where they're requesting additional expenditures. Maybe those are the departments that you might want to bring in and review those at a meeting. So you won't have to go through some departments that are just kind of moving on to kind of the status quo, but it's up to the council.
I mean, because it's also, we never know. It's always easy to add more to the budget, but how can we ever know how we could reduce the budget? You know, we never hear a department saying, "Oh, I don't need money for this or that," but it should be possible, like once out of 20, once in a while to reduce a department's budget, and that doesn't seem to happen. And I'm not sure how to make that happen or what you can suggest about that, but it seems like maybe with back and forth and asking questions, we might be able to at least understand a little more about it.
Ms. Howard?
Well, sort of two, I think that's an interesting point. I mean, there's a tradition in government budgeting that departments never want to offer up savings because you lose those savings. And so I think we ought to embrace some sort of gain-sharing concept whereby a department that finds savings gets to keep some of those savings so that there's an incentive for them to find savings. So, we should think about how we can imbue that sense in what we're doing. But maybe the second thing we ought to do is anytime there's a request for additional spending, additional investments, that ought to get heightened scrutiny, and that ought to trigger coming before us at the very least, so that people know when they're requesting increases, it will involve that kind of heightened scrutiny. If we can't have everybody come in every year.
That might make sense to reduce the number of meetings.
Mr. Liverman?
Yeah, I just want to say that we're coming off of consolidation, and I hate to say that we're mean and lean, but we've had a lot of budget cutting done within the last 2 years, and I think that we can do better. I would like to hear from department heads, but I don't think we need all of the department heads. I think just the ones that will make a major impact on the current budget. So I don't think it'll be a lot of investment in time. Just maybe 2 or 3. I think that we probably need to meet with. But thank you.
I have a quick question about the reduction in revenues. Is that something we should be worried about long-term? Is that an anomaly this year or what?
That is an anomaly this year. That was based on some personnel issues in the parking. So we believe that will return next year. Okay. And we're also taking steps to correct it as we speak.
Ms. Butler?
I guess a little bit to Jenny's point, CFAC is very careful in not crossing the line to discuss items that are really the purview of council, so they don't weigh in on the pros and cons of whether or not we should have cold storage. That really is a decision for us. But because we don't have a finance committee, really, and particularly when we get to the capital budget, those are really, they were decided by the administrator. There wasn't the same sort of discussion, by and large, if we'd had a standard finance committee to look into that and, ask some questions. So that would be another way of dealing with it without maybe the entire council, but to have CFAC and a finance committee.
A dedicated council finance committee.
Mr. Simon?
Yep. In answer to one of your questions, Mr. DeShield, I would prefer to see the baseline budget with current services and then the increases broken out separately as options for us to consider. The other question that comes to mind, just hearing the presentation, is so an increase in $1 million translates to, have we done the numbers in terms of what that would be on the tax rate?
Isn't it, I believe it's like 2 cents?
It's roughly 2 cents.
Right.
A little bit under?
Penny and a half.
Maybe penny and a half.
Yeah, okay.
The other thing that I would also ask from council, if there are other items or other areas in which, particularly service areas that are important to you, that I have not mentioned that you'd like us to look into the budget, I'm also looking for that feedback also.
Well, I'd like to mention one. The advisory planning districts task force, as you know, we were recommending a neighborhood planning program, and it hasn't changed much from the status report we gave you in the summer. But part of that was making planning documents available electronically and just improving our transparency in the planning department, and that's going to require some new technology. But I think it's really important, and so I don't know how we could get that moving, but I have a feeling it's going to require some money. We'd like to have a system where, a notification system that's electronic, and one of the recommendations, for instance, is to require developers to submit their applications electronically, which is pretty easy to do, but then we have to kind of upgrade our system to handle that, to make it easier to send it out to the residents. And also, the planning secretary has Windows XP computer.
Mr. Miller?
I'd suggest that rather than have all the department heads come before council for a discussion of their budget, I really don't think that there's sufficient time for council to do that. And I think that the more appropriate way of doing it would be to look at the department budgets and assess them from the standpoint of where the major changes in budgeting are taking place, and to have those departments come before council rather than do it uniformly for every department. So I think that there's a role for council to play in that, but I think it would choke council to have to deal with every department. But I think we can deal with those departments where there are major changes that are being requested.
It sounds like there's general consensus on that point. So if somebody's asking for a significant increase, to have them come. And it sounded like the other, I know Mr. Simon mentioned it, and I don't know if there's agreement that people want to see different options when the budget is presented. So to start with the baseline and then put in the options. Yeah,
Go ahead.
Ms. Butler.
Okay, just to sort of build on what the mayor and Council President Miller just mentioned, if we look at the budget pressure slide that you gave us, I actually think that we should have ideally, one of the council committees most closely responsible with each of them also vet any of the items that have upward pressure. So, for example, garbage and trash removal and I&O should go to the Public Works Committee.
Okay.
And insurance, presumably personnel, I guess. Right. So I'm not sure if all of these have a home, but if we could find a home through one of the council committees, that allows council to get a head start doing some of the work, with at least some of the representatives.
I don't know whether this would be included in some of the personnel increases that have been requested by infrastructure and operations or DPW, but I would like to see us have a little more attention to the downtown area. I think that the litter seems to have increased, and I don't know if we can think about an investment in sort of unifying the tree wells and paying some attention to some of the trees that have died downtown, just general cleanliness and litter issues.
I know that DPW actually has been doing twice a week major sweeps, and I've gotten some positive feedback from that, at least the days after it happens, so, which is
good. But I do feel like when we go into the weekends, invariably somebody sets just bags of awful trash out right as we head into the week.
Anybody else? Okay. Does that give you the answers to the questions you were?
Yes, it does, and I'll move on to capital at this point. Council has received the 6-year capital plan. And let me start with, we also provided council a summary of the 6-year capital plan, which lays out all of the departmental requests. And if you look at the summary, we pulled out separately what we call the big ticket items. They include things such as library renovations, firehouse expansion, the cold storage facility. So you'll see those laid out separately. And just to give you an idea, if we look at the 5-year capital plan, minus the funding sources that we have, in 2015, it's $8.1 million, 2016, $10.1, 2017, 5.1, 2018, and I won't go all the way out. The point that I want to make is, as you're aware, at the last meeting, the Citizens Finance Committee brought a model forward to the council, indicating to stay within the debt policy. The target was to have about $7.1 million on the aggregate spending each year. Based on this 6-year plan, we are above that amount by $939,000. And what I'm looking for is guidance from council in terms of how to deal with that, and there's a number of options that we can do. One is to stay within that 7.5. The other thing that we can do, as you can see in the aggregate, 900,000, we could start looking at, and I know there's some interest in looking at possibility of doing things like looking at what I consider called cash capital, and that's paying for capital items through the budget. And just looking at that, that's about if we divided it for the 6 years, about $150,000 a year in additional items that we would pay through cash, and that would keep us on this track. So there are a number of ways we can do it. I just need, or quite frankly, you can go above that amount. Just understanding that will impact debt service moving forward. I just need guidance from council on how to move forward. In addition, if there are any items on here, and again, I'm not asking you to go through the capital plan and authorize at this point, but to review it, and if there are any items that are not here that should be added, to let the administration know, and just give us some guidance on moving forward with the capital plan.
Can you explain how the cash capital works one more time? And isn't that adding still to the budget?
It will add to the budget. What it does, it will not be, it will add additional, let's say you did $150,000. You would put that in your budget on an annual basis. The one thing that's good about that, that's 1 year. The next year you don't have to do it. You can take it out of the budget. It just gives you the flexibility of not doing debt moving forward. Then that's one way to do it. It's really an option depending on how you want to deal with either increasing debt or just doing it through cash.
Right, so if I can play that back in kind of an oversimplified way, if we want to spend more on capital than our target, spend the rest in cash, and requires us to raise taxes or spend from the surplus, or hold the line on the spending. Right, I mean, that's basically the point.
And will that not also save the interest on?
Yes, it would.
And just to, and I know you're aware of this, but maybe we didn't say it, the numbers that we have down here include the big ticket items. When CFAC made their presentation and talked about that spending, they did it on an average basis and excluded the big ticket items. So this is a little bit better picture. Yeah, it's my understanding that the big ticket items were excluded from that 7.1 million.
No, we'll have to confirm. I don't see Scott in the audience tonight, Mr. Sillers, but if I recall, the 7.5 million in spending included 1 million each year in big ticket items. That was if I recall the presentation correctly. And so a concern I have, the numbers actually as presented look pretty reasonable given where we know we are. A concern I have is that we've pushed a big item out, which is the Public Works big ticket project, which is $10 to $12 million estimated.
Right.
And part of the reason we push it out is it blows up the model if we try to pull it into the 6 years, but it also blows up the model if we try to include it in year 7, 8, whatever. It would eat basically the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to have to do some serious thinking about whether we have to, whether we're setting the right spending targets. Because at least as it's been presented over the past few years, that project is necessary, and we've deferred it in 6 years, and that's on top of the deferrals that happened before that in the process. So,
I would support that, Patrick, because I'm surprised to see one item in here that pops up without any prior discussion at the council level, and that's library's second floor to the tune of $1,250,000. And it's not clear to me where that came from, how it got into the big ticket item, and it is a big ticket item. The library director, when the library director appeared before council, the library director didn't mention this. And I'm surprised to find it in here. I'm also surprised not to find any money in the big ticket item for the PFARS building, which we know we're going to deal with. So I think that what you've called the big ticket items here need to be re-examined and re-examine in the sense of where are they coming from, who's advocating them, and where does council see them fit in from a priority standpoint?
I can speak.
Second that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can speak to the library second floor a little bit because I go to the library board meetings, and that's something that the library is considering possibly doing. But it's, I think this is a question. If you're thinking of doing something, I think the request was to put it on the list just so it's there so we can potentially plan for it. But that's certainly one of the items on here that is a question mark, not a definite. Ms. Butler?
Right. Well, I would agree with Council President Miller that was the first that I had seen or heard of it was when I looked at this budget, and I guess that's one of the reasons why I brought up the issue of a finance committee again, that I think at least if some of us had heard some of these about some of the projects before, it would have been a better presentation. I also think, I know that the Senior Resource Center needed some work, but I was surprised to see the number attached to that as well.
Right, what is it? Do you know? I thought it was just I thought they needed bathrooms, but...
Well, she did talk about a number of changes that they wanted to make, a little bit of expansion, bumping it out, that they need more meeting room, and she did talk about it, but I didn't understand that there was a number that could be attached to it.
The other discussion that CFAC has had, just on a higher level, is that $7 million target the right target? And it was based on spending over the past few years, but both in the former borough and in the former township, we really constricted our capital spending because of the recession. And so we just have to be careful if we're basing that number on a special period and moving forward, does that mean that we're not doing proper investment in our roads and in our infrastructure? So it's just another thing that we have to keep in mind. And, unfortunately, either we're paying for it extra now or we're kicking the can down the road if that level is not the right amount. Mr. Simon?
If I can follow up on a couple of these counts, starting with that one. Mr. Kaiser and or Ms. Stockton, I think we are including all of the recommended road projects for the 6 years in the current capital plan. Is that correct? We haven't trimmed that.
That's correct.
Okay, so because we actually had that same concern about, is there enough of a backlog that it needs to bump up? But they've included the backlog in all the requests, and we've carried it forward. With respect to Council President Miller's comment about PFARs, I'm hoping Ms. Monzo maybe, or Mr. DeShield, you can tell us, I think there's not a big ticket item there if a couple of things happen. One, if we actually sell the property that we receive from PFARs, and two, if they succeed in their fundraising goals. Right. Is that right?
And that's the rationale, one of the rationales why you'll notice we didn't have a number yet, because that's still a question.
Right. So if either of those assumptions breaks down, which is possible, we could decide to use the property, and or they could come and ask us for help. But that's why there's no number there right now on that one.
But I think it seems a little bit unreasonable to think we wouldn't have some contribution to that. But I guess I also wanted to bring up, this year we had $800,000 worth of emergency road work. And I don't know have we left ourselves room for another
polar vortex coming?
Polar vortex
is coming, right?
In terms of, I'm sorry.
Well, if we need another $800,000 worth of road work after a bad winter, where does that fit into our capital spending plan?
And I believe, based on what I understand, they did evaluate the roads right now, and if it is an emergency, we're going to have to take a look at that. But they tried to take a good evaluation of the road conditions as they are today, and make their best guess of what they needed. So that's in the plan already. In terms of if we have a bad one, we'd have to look at the plan again and reevaluate.
All right. So what you want from council tonight is whether we want to go with this higher level, whether we want to trim it down in the process, if we want to trim it down, what that process would be?
Actually, what I was looking for, and you kind of, everyone kind of alluded to it, was, one, we have a target of 7.1, and whether council is interested in looking at how to deal with that 7.1, make it in a hard target, or is it more important to get everything that we need in this budget and present that back to you? That's really the feedback that I need from you.
Other thoughts on that?
Can we do both ways?
So you want to see a 7.1 and then options on top?
Yeah, I think that's what Patrick was saying. When you saying
I'm sorry.
I said, can we do both ways?
Okay.
I'm sorry. What's going through my mind is sorry for pausing there. What I'm trying to translate into is: are you actually asking us to prioritize some of these large ticket items today, or is that
no,
a discussion?
not today?
Okay. All right.
What I'm looking for, two things that I'm looking for. One, as I said, this is a preliminary. If there are, as you talked about, additional items that should be added, we should talk about those. Two, is how you want us to move forward in terms of presenting you a final document. Will that include, if we need to go above that 7.1, should we present you a document that does that, as long as we are justifying the capital needs for that request?
I guess I have a question before I try to answer that, and that is, do these numbers account for any spending from the capital surplus, or is the capital surplus flat if we account, or are just down that 939?
It's no consideration of spending of the capital surplus.
Okay, so one of the recommendations that I think CFAC had brought forward was the possibility of spending from that.
Correct.
Correct.
On capital, not on operating, right? And I would support that to try to flatten this, especially given the $4 million peak over the next 2 years, if we try to follow this plan.
And does this plan include the cash for the cash capital? Is that what you're calling it?
The way that would work, if you look at the slide that has the capitals with the capital summary with the 939 at the bottom as a deficit, essentially if we had about $155,000 a year in spending added to the budget in year for capital, that would erase that if this was the plan, and that's on average.
Wait, can you say that again? I'm sorry.
We would have to add about $155,000 to the budget a year on top of what we're capitalizing.
Correct.
Right? That's
Okay, but that would be getting us on the road to fiscal discipline with our debt policy, correct?
That would keep us in line with what was recommended by the Citizen Advisory Committee.
I think what I'm hearing is that people would like to see the 7.1, and then if we're going to go above that, what the options would be for paying for it, and then what you would pull out, so that if we just stuck with this, the flat 7.1, what we wouldn't be doing next year. Yeah, Ms. Butler?
And actually, I'll kind of jump in here and say that in terms of my question about whether they're asking for priorities on these projects, they're not today, but they should soon, and we should be thinking about them, including which ones we're willing to push out, and whether we have to pull forward or at least keep in view the very large project for Public Works, because if so, the model seems like it's a little too low in terms of spending. So,
Ms. Butler?
Right. Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Well, not exactly what I was going to say, but close. But I was going to say somehow we need to figure out about the Public Works facility. We can't let that just, be off the page. I think we have to consider that in some fashion.
Public Works facility.
I'll say the same thing a little differently, and that is I think that the council has to get engaged in prioritizing the large capital projects. Otherwise, we're going to be faced with a list of projects, some of which we don't understand, some of which we might not necessarily want to fund. So I think that before we get to that point, the council has to get involved and identify the capital projects that we think are important and when we think they ought to be phased in.
And this is a question just to follow up on Ms. Butler's suggestion. Is that something that everybody up here is interested in participating in, or should we have a separate finance committee to do that initial pass.
I'm interested in it.
I'm certainly interested also.
Okay, I think maybe we do it as a full board, unless we, for now at least. Okay. Is that good?
Okay, that's it.
All right, thank you very much.
You know, I'm sorry, last year, or right after consolidation, we also, remember, we met in small groups with Kathy, I think, didn't we, to go over the budget? Kathy, are you with? Yeah, we did. So that's another way we might do it, if that's better, do small groups.
That's a good idea. Okay, now we're moving on to our ordinance public hearing for this evening, which is an ordinance creating no parking zones on Park Place and portions of Moore Street and Hamilton Avenue, and amending the Code of the Borough of Princeton, New Jersey, 1974. Mr. Kaiser, can you just brief us on this one, remind us what this is?
Yes, as this was discussed earlier by Ms. Stockton, who's here this evening, this is really a housekeeping ordinance. It's based on a tour that Ms. Stockton took with Sergeant Murray, looking over the areas, checking to see where there were sight distances and so forth, and these revisions are recommended to address those particular issues. At the last meeting, there was concern regarding parking at the intersection of Moore and at Hamilton. And at that particular location, I believe the funeral home was contacted, and they are fine with the recommendations that have been made.
Okay, great, thank you. And if there's no further questions from council, I'd like to open up Mr. Simon.
Yeah, I'm sorry, there's one technical question. Is what page of our packet is this actually? And I'm having trouble finding it.
It might have been from the last meeting where it was introduced.
I didn't see it. I assumed it was from the last.
It was the last meeting where it was.
We have it from last week, the same.
On the one when it was introduced, I don't think that it gets repeated in this agenda.
So it's the meeting of the 31st. So I'd like to open up the public hearing on this ordinance. Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing. And is there further discussion from council on this ordinance, or is there a motion?
I'll move. Second.
Moved by Ms. Cromiller and seconded by Ms. Howard. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Ms. Howard?
Yes.
Ms. Cromiller?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Liverman?
Yes.
Ms. Butler?
Yes.
Mr. Simon?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Great, thank you. And the ordinance passes unanimously. Next, we have two ordinance introductions on the agenda for this evening, and I just want to get a show of hands. Who's here for the hours of operation? Okay. And who's here for the historic preservation? Okay. We'll start with the hours of operation then. So back in June and again in July, we held two work sessions about the idea of limiting hours of operation for retail businesses that operated next to residences in a residential zone. We heard from neighbors and from the business community. And at the end of that discussion, there was general agreement to bring the issue back to council, with council's preference being to limit the restricted period from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. I wanted to start with a bit of background about why we are considering this. Over the years, there have been concerns by neighborhoods about retaining their quality of life. One threat is the possibility that businesses that are open 24/7, which can dramatically impact your quality of life if they are located right next door. Lee Solo has confirmed that this is not a new concern, but an issue that has been a concern for years in several neighborhoods throughout town, especially ones that neighbor business districts. And of course, this is a threat that's not unique to Princeton. There's some things that are unique to Princeton. This is not one of them. So it made sense to look around the state and see what other towns were doing to deal with this issue. One solution adopted by several other towns in New Jersey is to pass an ordinance limiting the hours of operation of business near residential zones. In Springfield, for example, they passed an ordinance limiting operating hours of retail businesses. Camden also passed an ordinance limiting operating hours for businesses located near residential areas. Both of these were challenged in the courts, but ultimately upheld. There's good reasons to, I believe, move forward with a similar ordinance here in Princeton. It would help preserve the character of our residential neighborhoods and protect the quality of life of our residents. It would reduce the potential need for increased police patrols and also likely decrease the amount of litter. I want to thank both the residents who have called and who have emailed and written to us, and to the business community for their input and suggestions. It's been a while since we last discussed this, in large part because the Princeton Merchants Association and larger business community asked that we wait for them to talk with their members and to make suggestions for the ordinance, and some of those have been incorporated into this, and I hope make it a better ordinance. This is a good faith effort at some just common sense limits that don't exist today. It does not preclude 24/7 establishments in town. In fact, we heard there's the Wawa that's 24/7, there's other businesses in town that are 24/7. It's just limiting them when they're right next to a residence. And so with that, I'm going to invite up Mr. Solo to walk us through some of the changes that have been made since the last time this came before us.
Good evening, and thank you. What I'd like to do is just run through the provisions found in the ordinance. What I just did is I put up a PDF. It's a map portion of the zoning map, and it's meant to be illustrative of the areas that would be affected. In red are commercial zones that are not affected. In green on that map are commercial zones that abut a residential zone. We were not able really to identify commercial uses in residential areas at this time. There are very few, but there are a few, and we can talk about those. But that was just to give you a sense of who may be regulated and who might not be. Let me just turn now to the ordinance itself. As the mayor indicated, the ordinance regulates the hours of operations for restaurants, eating and drinking establishments, retail food establishments, retail sales, and personal services that are located in a residential zone or that abut a residential zone. The ordinance will require that those businesses will be closed to the public between the hours of 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. The ordinance does provide some exemptions from that 2 to 5 a.m. closure. The first is for holders of plenary retail consumption or distribution license, liquor licenses. The rationale for that is they are regulated elsewhere in the town's ordinances, and we didn't want the two ordinances conflicting or confusing anything. The second was for businesses that sell prescription or non-prescription medication in pharmacies or drugstores where the pharmacy is open beyond 2 a.m. Again, it's a public benefit, we felt, to be able to get prescription medications on a 24-hour basis. There's an exemption for medical, urgent care, and veterinary care practices so that they could also be open beyond the 2 a.m. period. We've exempted businesses in the E1, E2, E3, E5, and AET zones. Those are all the zones that are for secondary and above education zones. With a finding that they really operate a little bit differently than does the rest of the town. Most of those zones have fairly large lots, so the uses there are fairly well buffered. We've also made a provision in the ordinance for hotels And what the exemption is, we limited it to the services necessary for check-in and check-out. There was a lot of discussion with the merchants on that, and the concern there was that if a hotel has a restaurant and it's open beyond 2 a.m., that's not really fair to other merchants in town who have a restaurant and need to be closed by 2 a.m. The ordinance also allows for businesses to apply for an exemption from the 2 a.m. closing for any 6 calendar years, or 6 days in a calendar year. Sorry about that. Briefly, as many of you know, the changes that we've done since last we were here, we've defined operating hours as when a business is open to the public. So that 2 to 5 a.m. closure is a closure of when they're open to the public. So if a store is opening at 5 and the donuts have to be ready at 5, they can have a worker in there making the donuts, but they can't be open to the public selling it during that time. Again, we're trying to limit the level of activity, but recognize that businesses that are going to open at 5 a.m. need to have their employees there before that. Similarly, at the 2 a.m. closing, if they need somebody there to do some cleanup, they can do that without worrying. The second is that it now applies to businesses that are abut or are in a residential zone. Previously, it was within 200 feet, so it involved a lot more properties, and as you can see from the map, it's reduced fairly extensively the area where this restriction would be in place. You can see that much of the CBD district would be exempt because it does not abut a residential zone. It clarifies that hotels are regulated by the ordinance, but it provides that exemption regarding allowing for check-in and check-out. We heard at one of our meetings that a lot of times travelers, because they're going to New York or Newark or Philly airports, they need to leave at 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning to catch a flight, and this would allow them to be open to take care of their customers then. And as I indicated earlier, again, it allows businesses to be open beyond the 2 a.m. for any 6 days in a calendar year to provide for special events, whether it's a bookstore that wants to do a Harry Potter night, or if during reunions some of the restaurants want to be open beyond the 2 a.m. I should point out that the purposes remain the same for this ordinance. They're to improve the quality of life for residences during late nights and early morning hours. It's to decrease any incidents of large crowds congregating in proximity to those residents. It's to discourage activities that compromise the public safety during those late night hours, and finally to provide for an economic provision of scarce resources that would be needed to address any late night concerns. That's a quick summary, brief summary of where we are with the ordinance. As you can see, I think we've made some substantial changes from where we were a few months ago. We've had some good sessions with the merchants as well to try to address many of their concerns. I'm going to stop there, take your questions, and then I assume we'll open it up for some comment.
Okay, and before we take questions, I just want to explain sort of the process, which I forgot to do at the beginning of this. So we'll take some questions from council, then we'll open it up. I think there's more people here that want to speak than we probably have time to hear from everybody tonight, but there will be, if in fact this is introduced, there will be a public hearing also, so there'll be a second, if it's introduced tonight, there'll be a second meeting where we will have a full public hearing. So try to just keep that in mind so we can make this work tonight, and if somebody says something that you agree with, that you can either let them speak for you or keep your comment short. But we'll start with Ms. Howard.
Thanks. Lee, I want to thank you and the mayor for all you've done to listen to a lot of the concerns and the tweaks you've made that you just outlined. One quick question is, there have been concerns raised last time about Garden Theater, and is it affected, the Garden Theater?
Yes, the Garden Theater does abut a residential zone. We've talked to the university a little bit about that. They do run a number of late-night shows for undergraduates. It's one of their alcohol-free type programming. The majority of the Garden Theater shows are over by 2 a.m. There are some that would go beyond that. We may want to think whether to accommodate that, you want to increase the hours of operation. We didn't get a definitive number as to how many go beyond 2. what we heard was most of the shows are done by 2 a.m. It's limited to undergraduates. They actually close and lock the doors. So I think, in general, they would probably be in compliance with the 2 a.m. closing. We may want to think about whether you want to allow for some sort of special exception for that, although it gets a little unusual to do because you need to treat everybody alike.
Are there any other questions before we open up the public hearing? Yeah.
So why are we exempting holders of liquor licenses? Because I thought, I asked Trishka about that.
I mean, there's a separate, you already establish hours of operation for liquor stores, bars, restaurants that serve alcohol in a separate section in your code.
In our code.
So, right, so it's not that you have to exempt them, it's that they're already regulated under a different section, so it's to avoid confusion, really.
And if we did something that would conflict with that section by making a change, we just felt leave them out of it.
Ms. Butler?
So businesses can operate all night as long as they're not open to the public?
Yes, or if
So
they're
like
not, if they don't have a resident.
Do you work all night on Witherspoon Street, Phil?
That's not a retail business. I don't think that's considered.
Right, as
So it's a business
printing
that is-
operation, it would not be considered a retail or food or whatever. So that wouldn't, it shows up probably as green because the zone allows uses that could be regulated. And that, again, that's why I said the map was illustrative. We didn't identify individual uses and say they're exempt, they're not. We can answer those types of questions. But because they're not retail sales, they're not a restaurant, they're not personal service, they would not be regulated by this.
Are there any other questions before we open it up to the public?
Just a comment on what Ms. Butler said. So a business, for example, could do restocking during the period from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m., or a business that's involved in food preparation could be preparing food.
That's
in
correct.
that time period.
Mhm.
Just as long as the doors aren't open for the public to come in and purchase.
Correct.
Can we open it up to the public? Okay. I'd like to open this up for public comment, and just to help us make this work, if everybody could just form a line behind the microphone, and 3 minutes that will be strictly enforced, and you get extra credit if you're well under.
Shall I begin?
You can state your name and your either your affiliation or your...
John Marshall, I'm the president of Princeton Merchants Association, and I will keep this brief. The PMA, first, for the record, wants you to know that we take no position on this matter other than that which reflects the present and future interests and livelihood of our merchant base within this community and the continued vibrancy of our town relative to our internationally acclaimed university neighbor with its 8,000 students and 6,300 employees. PMA members simply wish to preserve our community's options, including retail hours, through the use of existing regulations, not necessarily new ordinances. The municipality and community alike must acknowledge that there are times when retail sales between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. are appropriate to many today, as is true with existing in Wawa, the Wawa and the University store, and or may become so in the future, unbeknownst to any of us here this evening. The PMA also acknowledges that most businesses choose not to be open throughout the night, thus recognize this ordinance need not be a point of contention with neighbors. Yet similarly recognize that none of us can anticipate what lies ahead in terms of community needs, the times in need, nor the locations appropriate to deliver such product and services. The PMA therefore requests the additional exemption of the CBD, which would solve the Garden Theater issue, the Princeton Shopping Center, which has a huge buffer zone around it, and then the Clifftown area, which already has some, Speedy Mart type things right on Route 206. I thank you for your time. Did I get extra credit?
I think you're good. Thank you.
Good job.
And I think for questions that are raised or suggestions that are raised, I'm just going to keep note of those, and we'll hear from the public, and then when we close it, we'll address some of those issues at the end.
Hi, I'm Jim Levine. Nice to see everybody. My wife, Lisa,
couldn't attend tonight's meeting, so she asked me to read a statement for her, which is as follows. A couple of months ago, I wrote to the council to present my argument against creating an hours ordinance in Princeton. Tonight, I'd like to use this public forum to voice my opinion. Rather than setting hours of operation for certain businesses, it would make more sense to enact laws that prevent the activities and conditions that could negatively impact surrounding properties. If noise, light, loitering, etc. pose a problem at 3 a.m., are they not still problematic at 11 p.m.? It's a slippery slope to start legislating as to which businesses can operate at what times. Getting ordinance passed is only the first step, though. These laws need to be enforced. As a resident living near the proposed store that started this conversation in our community, I'd be happy to have a convenience store nearby that's open 24 hours. People work on different schedules, and sometimes you need things at off hours. I understand the concerns of the residents that will be directly impacted. Still, they did purchase property adjacent to or near a business district. I think we can protect the residents and still allow businesses to operate when they believe they can best serve their customers. That's Lisa's view. I think I probably have a minute left for my view. And what I heard tonight was if you're not open to the public, you can do the things necessary to run a store. In my mind, those are probably louder. Hauling garbage, having things delivered. I've got 1 minute. Thank you, Bernie. And so you're going to start regulating and regulating. I think what you're really concerned about is the noise, the loitering. It's things like that that if you want to enact ordinances for or enforce them, that'll get more to the point than starting this. Also within this, it talks about the quality of life associated with not having them open. I'd like you to consider the quality of life of having a convenience store open during those hours as well. Thanks.
Thank you.
Jeez, recommend join here. My name is Richard Ryan. I own the Ivy Inn on Nassau Street, and I guess mainly I'm confused at this point as to why this is being even talked about to become a law. I see that you've exempted most everyone that would be affected by creating this law. In reality, it seems to me that there's two businesses in town, the potential 7-Eleven and Hoagie Haven, and the bookstore, I guess, gets the 6 days a week that they would, or a year that they would need to, release their new releases. But at the end of the day, who else is creating the added noise and pollution and crime and drug dealing if everyone is gone? There's no such business. The map's no longer up there, but purple represented the people that were affected and green was the people that were not, I think, or vice versa. In any case, both spots were minuscule. So we're creating a law, it seems to me, for positively nothing. It says to close between 2 and 5, but go in your business, do what you have to do, get to work, get everything done. Why are we taking time out of our day to create a law that is basically working fine without any restriction whatsoever? So I'm just confused.
Thank you.
I'm going to break this. Sorry. Hi, I'm Cara Carpenito. I live on Maple Street, and Maple Street is one of the few streets that has no parking restrictions other than overnight. And one of the reasons why we need that is because we need an ordinance like this, because during the summer, we can't open up our windows because people, they go to the restaurants, they have a couple of drinks, they walk down their street, and they are really loud. They talk on their phones. I mean, I've heard it all. It does affect our quality of life. And when you talk about other towns, I mean, a quick Yelp search on the internet shows that Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is also a very big college town, their restaurants, their bars, they close. They close at 10 o'clock, 1 in the morning. I mean, it's 3 hours, but we really do need those 3 hours, and this does need to be under control. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rob Dodge. I know this time and last time we were hearing hypotheticals and statistics, national statistics, and slippery slopes, and I want to relate a personal story of my experience with 24-hour convenience stores. And it's really about my friend, high school friend Franny Slater, who I met with her twin sister, Kathy Slater, in a health class in Martin County High School in Steuben, Florida in 1981. We became good friends because Kathy, Franny, and I were seniors in a freshman health class that was required for graduation in the state of Florida, and all three of us were new to the state that year. I also knew Franny because we ended up working at the same grocery store, Sherway Grocery Store, after school. She was a cashier. I bagged groceries. We often shared rides to the store after school. After graduation, Franny got a job at Little General Convenience Store, a 24-hour convenience store on Route 1 in Stuart, Florida. On April 28, 1982, sometime after midnight, it's not clear when, Franny was abducted, stabbed multiple times, then driven 13 miles away, shot, and left for dead, and she was dead. 4 men eventually were caught in the kidnapping and murder, and the reason they were caught is because they were overheard discussing who had actually killed her, the people with a knife or the gun. Was she already dead? I mean, it's crazy, right? So, yeah, and okay, 3 of the men sentenced to death. 1 of the men was not because he was too drunk and they felt like he didn't know what he was doing. So I think, it's really great that we have maybe these high libertarian ideals and capitalism rules all, whatever the businesses want. But these people in the room here, these are real people that live in the neighborhood. Franny Slater is a real woman who'd be alive today if Stuart, Florida Council had the foresight to limit this kind of 24-hour store. And I would also point out, many of these people in the room are the ones that are going to be affected. It's our family. They're not going to put a convenience store next to your house. Your kids probably aren't going to be working at 3 in the morning at a convenience store. My advice to council is take the people in the neighborhoods that are going to be affected by this. They want it. I urge you to vote in favor of the ordinance. Thank you.
On behalf of the Princeton, my name is Jack Morrison, Nassau Street Seafood, Blue Point Grill, Witherspoon Grill, Princeton Farmers Market, and I'm also a board member of the Princeton Regional Chamber and as well as the Princeton Merchants Association. I wrote a little, I hope you don't mind my glasses on the end of my nose. We asked Mayor and Council to take time in considering the impacts of a broad-reaching ordinance because your decisions sometimes have very real and unintended consequences. As an example, in the late 80s, Davidson's, our downtown food store, needed more space and parking and decided to move from the current CVS location and take over an old car dealership that was across the street from our fish market. Business was brisk at Davidson's. I think for most of you, you may remember. Becoming our community center, and our neighborhood boasted a flower shop, seafood market, bike store, bakery, copy center, insurance broker, drugstore, pizza, hoagies, and a small diner, the Carousel, but parking and a better traffic flow was needed. The university stepped in and offered a parking deck behind the Bratman property, or the West Coast Video property, providing the much-needed parking for customers, employees, and engineering students with a driveway that would connect out to Olden and then back out to Nassau Street. But a few neighbors were certain that the same drug dealers we're worrying about tonight would be attracted to that parking deck. Town council voted the idea down, and within 10 to 12 years, the food store, the florist, the bakery, the copy center, the drugstore, the insurance broker all closed, leaving our neighborhood void of many of the service businesses that make our residential and campus communities sustainable and walkable. Today, fast forward to today, our neighborhood is now made up of a dozen takeout shops and restaurants. With 50 to 75% of our customers are the college students, the college community, and their service workers. Understanding the growing university population, my glasses here, understanding the growing university population of students and employees, and realizing the potential of servicing that growth, we speak tonight for the shopkeepers, the silent student population, and the service workers. Again, we urge council to take time in considering